What's going on, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Believe in Jets podcast. I am your host, DTereman. Today, I will be joined by Mo Egger, host of the Afternoon Drive on ESPN 1530 in Cincinnati, the flagship home of the Cincinnati Bengals. Mo, thank you for joining me tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Dylan, what's up?
Yeah, checking the temperature around the league. Obviously, the Jets are pretty down bad, but the temperature in Cincinnati seems to be flipped around quite a bit, right? You start off 2-0 and you have Joe Burrow, then he suffers the injury. You drop to 2-4 with Jake Browning as the signal caller there. And then you get Joe Flacco back in the fold, and all of a sudden there's a bit of a new life in Cincinnati. So, how is the temperature in Cincinnati, first and foremost?
There's hope. It was going to be such a swing, depending on how they played against Pittsburgh and whether or not they won, because if they lose that game, it's 2-5. And we're talking about who they trade away. Do they trade away Trey Hendrickson? Who do they fire? Why did this go wrong? How bad might it get? Is the locker room going to fall apart? With the win, suddenly the AFC North as a whole is in play, maybe a little bit more in play for Baltimore, maybe a little bit more in play for Cincinnati. I think there's a sense of, all right, they've got some winnable games in front of them. They still hold out hope that Joe Burrow is going to come back in mid-December. The AFC top to bottom isn't great. And so, could this still be a season where the Bengals achieve something of substance? There's hope. Now, anybody who is hopeful about the Bengals because of what they're doing offensively will be quickly reminded that defensively they remain a train wreck, and that was nearly the story in the game against Pittsburgh. But relative to what a lot of us were talking about during those 4 games where they were mostly non-competitive, the 3 with Jake Browning and the first half of the game with Joe Flacco against Green Bay, relative to all of that, the tone is exceptionally optimistic.
Yeah, as a Jets fan base, we're kind of pseudo watching the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously because of the Aaron Rodgers ties. And it felt like once the Lamar injury happened, the Joe Burrow injury happened, Aaron Rodgers and Pittsburgh were going to run off with the AFC North. Now, obviously, Joe Flacco kind of brings that new life. You mentioned the defense, and we'll get there. But it seems like if they can just kind of hold the fort and maintain and stick with Pittsburgh, it's not going to be a runaway in this division. So it is going to shape up to be somewhat competitive down the stretch, obviously, with Lamar Jackson getting back. I joked with you offline, should we start good versus good or bad versus bad? So I'm gonna make the executive choice, and we're gonna do bad versus bad. The Jets offense versus the Bengals defense. You hit on it there. I have a couple stats from Pro Football Reference. Cincinnati is 31st in points allowed and 31st in yards allowed, 30th in pass yards allowed, and 31st in passing touchdowns allowed. They just came off a game against Aaron Rodgers in week 7 where they allowed 396 total yards. So that being said, does it really make a difference who the quarterback is for the Jets? Does Al Golden have to game plan differently if it's Justin Fields versus Tyrod Taylor, or is this just a hope and a pray that Cincinnati can just kind of maintain against what looks to be an inferior opponent?
Yeah, no knock on Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor or anybody. To me, it's totally irrelevant who the other team's quarterback is or really what the other team is offensively, because the Bengals' defensive issues, first of all, are not new. They were atrocious defensively last year. And I think the thing that frustrates a lot of Bengals fans is a lot of the same guys who have been complicit in their defensive struggles this year, we watched stink last year. And so it's every phase. It's lack of pass rush. It's tackling. It's coverage. It's assignment mistakes. In some areas, it's inexperience. I mean, you name it, they've done it poorly defensively. And so when that's the case, it doesn't matter to me who it is. It could be a guy with a world of experience like Tyrod Taylor. It could be a guy who could beat you with his legs like Justin Fields. It doesn't matter if the other team's offense has great elite weaponry on the outside or if they've got guys who struggle to get open. The Bengals' defensive issues have sort of transcended opponent, transcended quarterback. They struggled when they were playing against Carson Wentz. They struggled when they were playing against a Hall of Famer in Aaron Rodgers. They struggled when they were playing against Trevor Lawrence. They struggled when they were playing against the Detroit Lions. Heck, to a small degree, they struggled at times against Joe Flacco himself in the first game against the Cleveland Browns. And so until those issues get rectified, I spend almost no time or energy on who the other team's quarterback is, because I assume that guy is going to lead an offense that just inherently is going to present challenges to the Bengals because of how bad they have been so far on defense.
Yeah, a lot of those similarities in deficiencies on defense between the Jets and the Bengals. Obviously, the Jets in their first 5 games were borderline atrocious, allowing 28 points per game, and now 13 points back-to-back weeks. So hopefully, Cincinnati, much like New York, could eventually turn that corner. But it seems like, to your point, a lot of the people last year making mistakes are the same people making mistakes this year. And again, much like the Jets, that's the Michael Clemens and Tony Adams of the world who just somehow make it back on this roster and are showing you time and time again that they're not worth it. So hopefully something can change on that defensive side of the ball there. Now, when it came to coverage, and this is something that Jets fans have talked about pretty much at length all season, is their usage last week of cover 6, which is quarter, half coverage, a 3 deep shell with 4 guys underneath, zone coverage. That seems to be the not the cheat code, so to say, but the answer more often than not to this passing game that seems to be evolving at the NFL level right now. So 77% zone coverage. Do you think that it's worth dialing up more of a blitz? They only blitzed Aaron Rodgers about 11.5% of the time last week. Do you think it's worth trying to change philosophies this week against whether it is Fields or Taylor and send more blitzers? Because I look at a matchup where Tyrod Taylor came in against Tampa Bay, and they sent second or third level blitzers quite frequently out of Todd Bowles' defense, and it caused a lot of problems for Tyrod Taylor, taking hits in the pocket, couldn't get the ball out on time. So do you think that they'll stick with that 75+% zone coverage, or they might mix in a little bit more man and try to blitz whoever the quarterback is on Sunday?
Well, I think the difference between the Thursday night game against Pittsburgh and what the Bengals hope to have on the field on Sunday against the Jets is Trey Hendrickson. So Trey, obviously led the league in sacks last season, great pass rusher, didn't play against Pittsburgh. His absence was felt because if Trey Hendrickson's not getting after the quarterback, nobody is. Well, if you're not going to blitz without Trey Hendrickson, then I'm going to guess you're not going to blitz when you have him. Now, as you and I talk on Wednesday night, Trey is on the injury report, is limited. Zach Taylor said, we're kind of taking it day to day. And so let's assume for a second that he plays. I find it hard to believe that suddenly a team that doesn't blitz a lot is going to get their best pass rusher back, and they're suddenly going to start sending a ton of pressure at the quarterback, regardless of who it is. I think if Trey doesn't play, I don't know if you have a choice other than send a little bit more pressure. Now, the Bengals haven't been great in coverage. DJ Turner, however, if there is a guy on this defense who is providing some glimmer of hope, it's him. And so I wonder if they go, okay, we have one guy back there who we feel like can cover mostly anybody in the NFL. Does that make Al Golden think a little bit more about sending pressure? There's also a part of me that goes, you know what? Their safeties are so bad in coverage. Why not send them after the quarterback? Geno Stone, if you ask any Bengals fan right now, he's probably their least favorite player because he has been so bad in coverage. And so I've wondered, like, all right, he can't cover anybody on the back end of the defense. Why don't you put him in the box and see if he can go after the quarterback? Because if he can't do that, then you have your answer. He shouldn't be on the field. But I'm going to assume that Trey Hendrickson plays, and that assumption for me leads me to believe that they're not going to start blitzing the quarterback more than they have. I don't think their linebackers are guys that they view as having blitz as their strength. We saw it occasionally when they had Mike Hilton at corner last year, a really good slot corner. They would sometimes send him. They don't have him anymore. And so in the absence of that, I don't see it really coming from that position. I think their general MO has been, we think we can get home. And look, man, if you look at the construction of the roster, Miles Murphy, former first-round pick, Shamar Stewart, first-round pick this year, Trey Hendrickson, one of the highest-paid defensive ends in the league, their philosophy is pretty basic, so far at least. We took these guys because we think they can get after the quarterback, and we don't think we have to help them all that much with other dudes.
Yeah, when you look at the defensive front four on paper entering the season, I was a big advocate of Shamar Stewart going higher than he did at 17. I was a big fan of his. I understand there was a lack of production and very traits based, and it seems to be very, I guess, a rocky start for him altogether. But you look at it on paper, and it looks like that front four should be able to get home. You mentioned Murphy as well, and I know Hendricks was out last week, so I thought that might have had a bit to do with the blitzing, but it makes sense. If you have your best horses in there, you're probably going to assume that you can get home with four. Maybe sometimes you send a fifth guy at most. But to your point about the safeties, and I go back to that Tampa Bay matchup, that's what Todd Bowles did. And he blitzed us with Antoine Winfield multiple times. And it was very unsettling for our offensive line, our backs in protection, our tight ends in protection. So if it is Tyrod Taylor who does lack the mobility that Justin Fields has, even though he hasn't seemed to use it in a couple weeks, I'm with you. I put Turner on Josh Reynolds because we don't have Garrett Wilson in this game, or we're anticipating no Garrett Wilson in this game due to the knee injury. And then you also have a banged up Breece Hall who left the game last week with his own knee injury right before the half. He came back in and finished. But with no Garrett Wilson and you have Turner locked up on Josh Reynolds, there is really nothing you can do offensively to, Tyler Johnson's not going to get schemed open. Arian Smith has been a large disappointment on the offense for, much of this season. I believe he only has like 3 or 4 catches, maybe even 6 targets on the year. So I'm with you there. If they can have that trust in Turner to be the lockdown, maybe you do, put him on Josh Reynolds because he seems to be the only one that can be productive in this wide receiver room without Garrett. And then that allows you to do more, I guess, exotic things on defense, whether you want to blitz or whether you want to just stay with your 4. So philosophically, I know they're more of a zone, but if they can do that with the shadowing of Turner on Reynolds, I think that you're really, hand tying the Jets offense, which is already playing with one hand tied behind its back already.
Yeah, the DJ Turner piece is important. Again, if there's been a bright spot in the Bengals defense this year, it's been him. Had just a terrific game against the Packers, 5 pass breakups. If anybody who saw the Thursday night game or at least the highlights, they saw the pick he made on the sideline where he takes the ball away from DK Metcalf. He is a guy who has very much played his way out of the doghouse. You would stop well short at this point of saying shut down corner, but I think Al Golden can at least go into a game like this going, okay, I can put DJ Turner here. I can start my game plan, whatever it's going to look like moving forward. I can start with DJ Turner's going to cover his man and be okay. We'll be okay. And I don't think that was the case a month ago. So maybe as his ascension continues, which from this standpoint, obviously, hopefully it does, maybe what they do defensively can evolve. But I feel like we're still a ways away from seeing them be able to do anything schematically. They struggle doing the basics. Like they struggle tackling. They struggle being in the right spot. Their linebackers, they started 2 rookie linebackers against Aaron Rodgers last week. They struggle just playing basic position defense. So as much as people throw a lot of shade at Al Golden, I go, I'm not sure what he is supposed to do when he's got guys who just simply can't bring the ball carrier to the ground. How do you throw more at these guys when they can't handle the basic vanilla stuff? And that goes back to preseason when they were basically playing, hey, here's 11 guys. Let's just tackle the guy with the ball. They couldn't do that during the preseason. Game plans, as they've gotten more sophisticated in the regular season, they haven't been able to get anything done, master anything in that regard. So I think it's going to be a little while before we see Al Golden expand upon what his defense does.
Yeah, when you can't do the basics right, you're not going to be able to do the advanced, nuanced things correctly. And we saw that with, like I said, the first 5 weeks of the Jets season. Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Tampa Bay. Obviously, you have MVP, Hall of Fame type caliber quarterbacks in Rodgers, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield. Tua Tagovailoa, he ate us up with play action passes. And like you said, with rookie linebackers, we had Kiko Maui-Noa playing 90% of the snaps that game. It's like, yeah, when you have rookie linebackers playing against even veterans who aren't necessarily great prolific passers, they can still take advantage. So starting 2 rookies against Aaron Rodgers is always going to be at the detriment of the defense. And then they flipped it around against Denver and Carolina. So maybe the Bengals can take a play out of the Jets playbook and have a defensive players only meeting, and they can turn things around and hopefully get their points per game allowed down into like the upper teens, where it's like about league average instead of being second worst in the league. So with that, we can flip over. Now we can talk good on good. the Bengals offense versus the Jets defense. And I say good, a little tongue in cheek on both sides because it's Joe Flacco. So you can't always anticipate, 357 yards, 342 passing yards and 3 touchdowns last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw Justin Fields dice up Pittsburgh in a bit of a different way. He had a good amount of passing, but he had a lot of rushing as well in that game. Ja'Marr Chase, though, if there is no Sauce Gardner, who on this team could even remotely come close to stopping Ja'Marr Chase? I understand Brandon Stevens, their new free agent from Baltimore, who had a rocky start to his Jets tenure, but now has picked it up the last, let's say, month or so. 357 receiving yards for Ja'Marr Chase in October alone, and they have at least one more game left. Is there anybody outside of Sauce Gardner who might not play with a concussion that is capable of stopping Ja'Marr Chase?
Well, first of all, as a diehard University of Cincinnati Bearcats fan, it kills me that we might not get a chance to watch Sauce here because he is beloved among anybody who loves the Bearcats, and I am his biggest fan. So I have been hopeful that we see the Sauce versus Ja'Marr matchup. Apparently, that is at least not looking good. I don't think there's anybody in the sport who can cover Ja'Marr Chase consistently. You could look at his numbers, and I've talked about this on my radio show this week. You could obviously look at his numbers and go, hey, he must be pretty good. You really have to watch him. His performance on Thursday night was spectacular. And you could look at the numbers and go, yeah, 16 catches, 23 targets, 161 yards, and a touchdown. How hard he plays, how hard he works to get open, what he does blocking. Like, T. Higgins signed up to be his second banana. And T. Higgins had a great game against Pittsburgh, made the play of the game. Nobody talked about it because of how good Ja'Marr was. I don't think there is a DB in the sport who consistently can cover him. And so, I always look at it through the lens of the other team's defensive coordinator, and it's like, pick your poison. I mean, and it is. It sounds it sounds so simple, but watching this team every week, you watch defensive coordinators who go, all right, I guess I'll double Ja'Marr, and then I'll take my chances with T. And then with Joe Burrow as quarterback, I've seen defensive coordinators go, screw it. We'll bracket both and see if there's a third guy. And often during the Burrow, Chase, Higgins era, there has been. And by the way, there was on Thursday night on a key play where Joe Flacco threw the ball to Andre Yoshivas. So it's the ultimate conundrum, right? Like, you have two, like, just A-list wide receivers, and Ja'Marr Chase, who for my money is the best wide receiver in the game. I don't know. I mean, and then so you know that if you have Sauce Gardner, take him away. What do you do? Now, okay, you get after Joe Flacco. That's the answer. Joe Flacco can't move. The Bengals don't have a great offensive line. So can you get after him? And can you get after him quickly enough before Joe gets rid of the ball? Because the one difference that we have seen from Joe Burrow to Joe Flacco, as awesome as Joe Burrow is, Joe Flacco has made that offensive line look pretty good because he has been really good at getting rid of the football. And Ja'Marr Chase or T. Higgins is going to be open. And with when Jake Browning was playing the 3 games where he started, it's like, buddy, it ain't rocket science. If Ja'Marr Chase is open, throw it to him. If Ja'Marr Chase isn't open, you should probably still throw it to him. When they acquired Joe Flacco, and everybody is wondering, like, all right, is this going to work? And long term, it might not. But in the short term, like, boy, you're really going to play him against the Packers on Sunday when they just got him on Tuesday night? My thought was, number one, there's not an offense or a defense this guy doesn't know. Number two, at the very least, Joe Flacco will go, well, if Ja'Marr Chase is open, I should probably get it to him. Jake Browning missed him, just time after time after time, which is why he struggled. So, but, game to game, it's an immobile quarterback playing behind a bad offensive line. So can you get to him? Because if you can, well, then Ja'Marr Chase isn't going to have the ball thrown to him. And Joe Flacco is going to make mistakes, and the Bengals offense is going to stall. I think with this offense, though, the real key to their last game is they were able to run the ball. Chase Brown had nearly 10 yards a carry. They ran it for over 6 yards a carry. I think the number was 6.2. The Bengals have been really bad at running the ball for a while, consistently, and suddenly against the Steelers, they were able to do so. Have they unlocked something? Or did they do something that's not sustainable? Or did they do something that the Jets have the antidote to? Because to me, I watched on Thursday and thought, all right, going in, Chase and Higgins are going to be a tough cover no matter who the quarterback is. But now they're running the ball. Then they become really difficult to defend. So what I want to know moving forward, not just on Sunday, but for the foreseeable future is, can they run the ball? Because we talked about it so much last week. Like, do they even try to run the ball? Should they just say, screw it, Joe Flacco or Joe Burrow or whoever the quarterback is should just drop back 60 times? Or should they try to do it more? Or is the coaching staff the problem because they can't figure out, regardless of who the offensive linemen are, regardless of who the running back is, and regardless of who the quarterback is, they still can't figure out how to run it. And then on Thursday, they did run it. So that, to me, offensively, is the biggest question. And if the answer is no, what they did against Pittsburgh's an outlier and they can't run it against the Jets, then they're a little bit easier to defend. If, hey, you know what, they tapped into something and now they're putting Joe Flacco in 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3. They have more 3rd and short situations. Then the playbook opens up, and with a wide open playbook and those two receivers, then they become extraordinarily difficult to defend, especially when you have a quarterback who's smart enough to realize who he's got on the outside.
Yeah, when I heard the stat entering Thursday night's game against the Steelers that Chase Brown was only averaging 2.7 yards per carry, I was really disappointed because he had such a good breakout last year, and I was really looking forward to his ascension in this year. But you talked about somebody who is seemingly ascending in this offense in Andre Yoshivas, and I feel like he might have been disregarded a little bit when he was first picked, but I feel like he's come on strong as that third option, not necessarily a true reliable third option, but he's there time to time and he makes some pretty big plays for this offense. Now, when you talked about Joe Flacco versus Joe Burrow, the time to throw is definitely huge. I feel like Joe Burrow has a bit of a longer time to throw. I don't have the exact stats, but it feels like Joe Burrow is prone to holding on to the ball, trying to make that play, that dynamic play. Whereas Joe Flacco, he sees Jamar Chase with a guy 7 yards off the line of scrimmage, and he knows. And the whole joke has been Joe Flacco threw the pass on Thursday or on Monday, and it got to Jamar on Friday. The anticipation that he's throwing to Jamar Chase specifically, he wasn't lying in those press conferences when he says, when Jamar says something, I'm going to say, yes, sir, and we're going to do it because he understands that in order to prolong his own career as a quarterback, he needs to rely on his best option. And that quite frankly is Jamar Chase. But I was looking at the pass run splits from that Thursday night game, 67.1% pass, 47 out of their 70 offensive plays were pass plays. Do you see that being a similar formula? I think from the Jets' perspective, stopping the run has been their stronger asset. So if they are able to stop Chase Brown in the run game, Samaje Perine, do you anticipate it looking more like it did in week 7, where it was about a 67 to 32% split, or do you want them to be a little bit closer and hope that they can run the ball, especially in the second half, given that they might have a lead?
I would like to think that when Zach Taylor and Dan Pitcher, the offensive coordinator, sit down to game plan, they go, okay, let's try to expand upon what we did on the ground. Look, the Bengals are never going to be a run-first team. I don't care who the quarterback is, because when you have Chase and Higgins and you're running the ball, you're typically doing what the other team's defensive coordinator wants you to do. But you can't ask Joe Flacco to drop back 45 times, just like you don't want to ask Joe Burrow to drop back 45 times. And so to me, the success they had on the ground as a play caller, you try to build upon. Especially now, you could lose a lot of games believing in the Bengals defense. But in this game, if you feel like, you know what, we're not going to have to outscore the other guy. Let's see if there's something in that ground game that we can kind of lean into a little bit more and take a little bit of the pressure off Joe Flacco. But even if they run it more often, now throw out, hey, they're up 20 in the fourth quarter and trying to salt the game away and just trying to grind down the clock. They're never going to be a team in any sort of regular game that decides we're going to take the ball out of the quarterback's hands. Their bread and butter are the two dudes on the outside. And so that's not going to change dramatically, but I think everybody walked away from the last game going, hey, there's running game success. Do it more because you're doing it well. And if that goes away, all right, well, you do have Chase and Higgins in your back pocket. And so that's my expectation, that they try to build upon what they did by doing it better and running it more frequently. But at the end of the day, if the Bengals offense works on Sunday, you're going to see a close to a double-digit number in the receptions column for either Chase or Higgins still.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look philosophically, and I'll tie it back to the Jets offense, philosophically, these are two of the most opposite offenses you could find in the NFL. The Bengals are very pass happy, pass first. The Jets are very run heavy. They want to run the ball even when they're down 17 points in the third quarter. That's just what their bread and butter is. But to your point, when you find that little bit of success for the Bengals in the run game or for the Jets in the pass game, you really have to hone in on that as an offensive coordinator and say, okay, now how do we elaborate on that? How do we expand on that and get Justin Fields, or whether it's Tyrod Taylor, to turn the quick passing game into the play action, longer developing game? And to the Bengals point, once you have the run game slightly starting to become more established, how do you start early and get Chase Brown or Samaje Perine the ball and really put the Jets defense in like a, oh, okay, we got to go tackle everybody type of mode, and then you go hit them over the top to your two favorite wide receivers. So philosophically, I think it's going to be funny to watch both offenses because they're just so opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we'll leave it on this one. Obviously, with the caveat that it is Wednesday night and there is no official injury report, and there's still a lot to be seen over the next 3.5 days until game time. How do you see this one playing out? Do you have like a rough score? We're not going to hold you to it or anything, but do you have a rough score for us in this one?
Well, I think Cincinnati's going to win the game. Everybody here will tell you the Bengals are not in a position to take any opponent for granted. By the way, we all remember the Mike White game in 2021. So, hey, they're going to go to Jersey and beat Mike White and the Jets. And Mike White, who was here for about 10 days after Joe Burrow got hurt, had something to say about that. I think I'll put it to you this way. I think they won the Pittsburgh game against Green Bay. So they acquired Joe Flacco on Tuesday night, played the Packers on Sunday. My take on that game was that's a preseason game. You're not going to Green Bay and winning, but get Joe Flacco on the field with his guys, get him some game reps, build some chemistry, develop in the offense, and maybe there's a payoff against Pittsburgh, and there was. I think that continues with the benefit of kind of the mini bye, time to breathe. I assume right now I am going to assume that Trey Hendrickson is going to play. I'm going to assume that some of the things we saw them do offensively carry over at least to a degree against New York. And I think the Bengals win. I think the Bengals are going to cover the number. I don't trust them to blow out anybody because their defense is atrocious. So I'll go with something like 31-24, something. Again, I trust the Bengals defense so little that I believe whether it's Tyrod Taylor, who's been in the league forever, or it's Justin Fields, who we know well because he played at Ohio State, there are going to be moments where if you watch the Jets, you're like, holy hell, like, can we play these guys every week? The Bengals defense has been so bad. And so I find it hard to believe they could blow out anybody, quite frankly. And in their 3 wins, they haven't. They were lucky to beat the Browns. They were lucky to beat the Jags. And their offense was too good for me to say they were lucky against Pittsburgh, but the defense almost coughed that game up too. I think the Bengals win. I think the Bengals cover, but I don't necessarily think that they can run away and win this in a blowout. And so I'll put it at like, I don't know, 31-24, something like that. I think the way the offense has worked over the last 6 quarters, if you're a Bengals fan, should make you feel encouraged that they can build upon that and have a good day offensively.
Yeah, I seem to be fairly aligned with you. I had 31-20. Just right now, obviously, we need to see if Sauce is going to go, if Trey is going to go, what these injuries do look like, and everything at the back end of this week. But I have it about 31-20. The Jets probably go back to their garbage time Kings label, and they get a couple in the fourth quarter, because it seems like they haven't scored a meaningful touchdown since that week 1 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Everything has come when they're down 14 points or more. So I'm going to go 31-20, but I do think that the Bengals defense, at least, and I know the Jets offense has been struggling, the defense at least opens the door for the Jets. If they show up on defense and they do get after Joe Flacco, they finally get that pass rush going, they're able to hit him and get him off his spot. I do think that will bode well. The offense just really needs to pick it up. And after owner Woody Johnson comes out and says, we're 0-7 basically because of our quarterback, you really have to flip the play and turn it all on its head. And hopefully that's the pendulum swinging back up for the Jets offensively. So I'm going to go 31-20. Mo, I appreciate you hopping on with us. Plug where everybody can find you one more time before we get out of here.
If you are thinking as a Jets fan, God, I want to listen to a guy talk about the Bengals every day. I do the afternoon drive show on ESPN1530 in Cincinnati, which you could listen to 3 to 6 weekday afternoons or anytime you'd like on the iHeartRadio app.
All right. For Mo Egger, I am Dylan Tereman. I appreciate everybody tuning in to another episode of the Believe in Jets podcast. We will talk to you soon.